I chose to speak on the Meadows Massacre for a couple reasons. Number one is one of the essays of the gospel topics that have been written, one of the earlier ones that came out. I will show you how to find the actual essay, which I strongly encourage everybody to read and study. There are a lot of footnotes and references, and then if you want to read more, I will also suggest a very good book that has been written on the topic. My involvement with the Meadows Massacre has been an accident. I never heard of it until a certain point, and then eventually I was asked to use my knowledge in science and the availability of a lab where I was working to do some testing to answer a couple questions that were pertaining, minor questions, but still for me, were interesting little projects pertaining to Mountain Meadows. So I'm going to give you some background on this, which has been considered one of the largest American against American massacre that took place on the American territory. I think only the unit bombing of Oklahoma has surpassed that as in size, and so it's a sad event in the history of the United States as well as in the church history, and has been the topic of discussion and criticism toward the church for many years. So first of all, I want to remind everyone, in case we forgot, that the church believes in peace and love, and that we rely on the gospel of Jesus Christ to love our friends, our families, but also to love our enemies. The message of Jesus Christ is a message of tolerance and love. That's what we know in the church, that's what we teach, that's what we try to live. But I'm sure every one of you in your life had a little bit of a moment where maybe you lost your temper, or you yell at somebody, or you wish that the guy in front of you that cut you online in the car, maybe their tire blew off and they fell off the cliff or something. And so we're mortal, and we tend to have a need to control our feelings at times when we lose our patience. So even though we preach that the church is still made by men and women that have a free agency, and that sometimes don't represent the church as well as they should. And we suffer from that, and a lot of families and communities have suffered from that, and is a gross mistake to assume that the behavior of few represent the beliefs of many. But of course, as the Church of Jesus Christ is often under attack and the topic of discussion, then we can expect some of the more negative example in the history of the church to be used to generalize the whole church, in particular its leaders. I want also to remind, as a background, that the church was under heavy persecution during the first 2 decades. We cannot forget that since its organization in 1930, the Saints, which has been discussed earlier by Matt, were characterized by a sense of unity and gathering and building Zion. These have attracted many persecution, and they were not just verbal persecutions. And so some of the point, I mean, we know they had to relocate not by choice, but one of the event was the extermination order that was signed by the governor of Missouri, where basically they made it illegal for anyone to kill a member of the church without having to be prosecuted. And My wife is actually from Missouri, and she's a Mormon. And she told me that when she was born, the law was still in place. And they, for some reason, was forgotten in the Missourian legislation. And so up to the early 70s, you could still have killed a Mormon and then appeal probably to this law and not being prosecuted for it. And now that's being removed. There was another sad event, also in Missouri, the Huntsville Massacre. I found a spell both with W and U. I don't know. Maybe somebody can help me understand which one is the correct spelling. I've been to that place. There is absolutely nothing there today. But at that time, there was a community of saints, and there was a mob that came into town and did a lot of violence on the saints, including the killing of 19 individuals as young as age 9. So there were also children that were killed on the event. Many reports of sexual violence, rape, stolen property, homes that were destroyed, saints that are being driven out from their homes. So why I'm saying that? I'm not saying this because as Latter-day Saints now we are justified to pay back. Absolutely, but we have to remember the historical context and the fact that these people were on the defense all the time. They trusted other Latter-day Saints, but they were very wary about anyone else that maybe even started with some verbal accusation, because they always started that way and then eventually escalated into something more than that. This is a picture from the Huntsville Massacre, an image, a painting that represents the saints. Some of the saints hid into a barn, a building, and with weapons, trying to defend themselves from the attackers, and that instigated or motivated the mobs to shoot. And there was a fire exchange, which then led to the death of these individuals. Eventually, the saints were cast out from Nauvoo. They were kicked out, and they moved to Utah, which at that time wasn't Utah, was an unorganized territory. And Brigham Young settled the area, and the saints made it there. And one of the reasons to be there was to protect themselves, to build Zion away from the Gentiles, away from those that were persecuting them. As they move westward and they settle in Utah and the surrounding territory, one of the things that they faced was the encounter of native tribes, which at that point they were also very wary. And probably more so, without probably, more so than the saints would have been, because with the European arrival after the rediscovery of the Americas, as you know your history, the Europeans took choice land, exterminated natives, and the survivors were kicked out, sent away, and eventually confined to reservations. And so natives were wary of the white man, knew that he was an honest individual. We don't have time, but there was some very big cultural differences in the way that they view things like properties, for example, which might have some implication with the Meadows Massacre, where the Indians, the Native Americans, consider everything as a gift from God, and no one had ownership, but everybody had ownership, not anyone specific. And so they felt like, if you have something and I like, you should give me some of that without having me even asking for it. Actually, I can take it from you. And of course, the white man was all like, mine, and I won't give you any of that. And so this cultural contrast then make it also difficult, not just for Europeans in general, but even for Latter-day Saints, which tried to build good relationship. And why did they want to build good relationship with the natives? How did the Latter-day Saints, the early Mormons, view that? Do you remember? Elder Stevens? Okay. They were? Say, go ahead.
They were descendants from the Lamanites.
Exactly. So they believed that they were the descendants that the Book of Mormon spoke about, of the people that the Book of Mormon spoke about. And so they felt like there was something special spiritually, both because of the most important records they had. And so they immediately, Joseph Smith established missions among the Lamanites and the Indians to preach the gospel to them. So there was a great interest to establish good relationship with natives, but even if they tried to do so, it wasn't always ideal. Brigham Young, when he moved to the what is now in Utah, he was also an official for the relations with an official. Do you say that? Official authority to establish good relationship with native groups, besides being the governor and the prophet. And so in Utah, where the saints established themselves, they had to deal also with local natives, which at time created some problems, and at time they became, they had converts and became friends. Another things that happened were wrong reports or incorrect reports, and Matt should probably give this part of the presentation. I mean, he's the church historian. I'm just trying to give you some quick background. So if you think I'm saying something that is not correct, you please feel free to come here and help me with that. But we have something in the history of Utah and of the United States called the Utah War. And basically it was the results of wrong reports. I mean, there are all these Mormons in the unorganized territory, Arware, in the Great Salt Lake area, then trying to establish a huge state. We somehow know the size of Utah today, but Brigham Young actually sent Mormons to settle different areas all the way from Canada down to Idaho, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, all the way to Mexico, right? That was a very north to south colonization, many settlements, many cities. They're still there today, still have a large population of Latter-day Saints. And he wanted to organize a very large state and call it Deseret, as you remember. And the idea was not approved by the United States government, but the Saints were living in isolation. So if you don't know what somebody is doing, you kind of grow suspicion about what these Mormons doing out there. They created so much problem here, and we know they hate us because we only killed the prophet. So we don't know why they would not like us. But I wonder if they're kind of working on some sort of a plan to create disturbance or problems in the long run. And so there were reports sent to the United States presidents that were not correct, but he believed them. And he organized a militia or army, not a militia, an army, to go and check on the Mormons. And that was a large army. It wasn't just sending that. In fact, the objective was to replace Brigham Young as the governor and put a new one that the president of the United States have chosen to replace Brigham Young. And because they were afraid of the Mormons would not like that, I don't know why they wouldn't, such a great idea, then they sent a huge army to make sure that this was going to take place. So news arrived to the Latter-day Saints, and Brigham Young established something called the martial law. And when there is a martial law, it means you have a certain time of the day that you have to be in your house, to be safe when it gets dark. And what's the name of that?
Curfew.
A curfew. When you need to have a curfew. You have to safeguard supplies, because in a time of war there is no time to grow crops, so you have to use your resources to defend yourself, so no resources that have to be wasted in any way, and so on. So, and then you organize, of course, a militia. And at that time it was culturally acceptable that if you could not obtain protection from the government, that you would organize yourself with some volunteers, some militia, So some sort of local organized army, which we had, which Brigham Young organized as well. So what is the problem? Is that as people were, there is something called the Oregon Trail. And if you think about the map of United States, and I should have put one up to let you see that, we see that at that time, in the mid-19th century, there was the East and what is today called the Midwest. So everywhere from the Atlantic coast, from all the way to Illinois or Missouri, that was settled and colonized, and so they had cities and so on. And then as you go more westward, there is nothing. Like, that's what the pioneers did when they left with their hand carts. Until you get to a certain point, which is the California coast. And in California and Oregon, they were already have large settlements. They discovered the gold about the same time, 1849 was a big gold rush in California. So a lot of people moved there, large cities, and so great climate. People wanted to move there. They were maybe not happy, or they wanted something better than what they were having in the East or the Midwest, so they had to go there. It was a big problem. You saw how hard it was for the Saint. It was also hard for anybody else. And so there was this Oregon Trail, which allowed for a long migration, large caravans pulled by oxes and horses. You would take everything you have with you, so cows and other animals to start a new life over there. But it would be a long stretch to bring supplies for the long journey. And so you would try to stop at a certain place and get some more supplies. And so what people thought at that time is like, if I only can make it to Utah, which wasn't Utah, but to the Salt Lake, and they would come down from the north part, so from Wyoming, and then start going down to California, and then stop among the Mormons that we don't like, but we like their food. And kind of still there, we get a lot of people coming to our activities when we have a lot of refreshment, but they don't come on church on Sunday. So I'm actually proposing that we should have refreshment on Sunday to increase participation. But that's what they wanted to do. They want to buy supplies. But now there is martial law, and so we were expecting to get to Utah and get something and buy something, and they're not selling it to us. And we really don't like these Mormons. So now we like them even less because they created a problem for us. How am I going to make it now from what is now known as Utah all the way to California? And this what happened is at about this time, there was also another accident where one of the 12 apostles was killed, and his name was Parley P. Pratt, and he was murdered in Arkansas, which is one of the states on the east side of United States. And so these events, if you start putting the pieces together a little bit and trying to get a feel of what these Mormons were feeling, their life was was a jeopardy. They were insecure. They felt they were not protected by the U.S. government. In fact, not only that, but they were sending an army to probably even attack them or destroy them. They just killed one of their apostles. They killed their prophet. They have to relocate it. They have a history of persecution. And they're not innocent as well, but they're getting a little bit wary of everything that is going around them. And so at a certain point in 1857, there was a caravan of migrants that were trying to make it to California, and they were called the Baker Fancher Caravan because that's where the team leaders, and there were about 120 people or so, 130, 140 people. And then they made it from Arkansas. Okay, this is important. They just killed an apostle there, and they knew about it. Sounds like from some of the accounts that they actually, when they could not buy food in Utah, these people got so wary of how the Mormons were not dealing and helping them that they start verbally having some exchanges that were not very nice. And one of the topic was the fact, you know, hey, we kill one of your apostles. We have the gun that shot Joseph Smith, your prophet. And I mean, I don't know how many of these accounts are true or just a legend, but this is some of the things I read in the books. And there was the things start escalating. And so the way that this group came in was from Wyoming down in the Salt Lake Valley, and then start going southward along what is today I-15, where they start going, you know, then to Fillmore and then St. George, and then they would go again westward into California. And as they're making their way through the heaviest settlement of Latter-day Saints, they, what's the word? The bickering? No, what's it? That's right? Say again? Bickering start increasing, and the rumors, the exchanges became worse and worse. Okay, so what happened then? So these are the references that I'm going to point out to you to learn more about this. And then I'm just going to give you a very brief summary in one slide of what happened, and then I'm going to tell you something that I did that has to do with that. So again, I'm not trying to be the expert on the Meadows Massacre, but this is a book written by three very good church historians. It took probably is the book that took the longest in the history of the church to be written, because they wanted to make sure they had all the facts and everything was correct. It's called A Massacre among the Meadows, and it's published by Oxford Press, I believe, right? Somebody know? Yeah. And then on the LDS.org website, if you go to LDS.org, and then in Italian will be under Scritture Studio, and then choose Argomenti Evangelici. In American, in English, will be Scriptures and Studies, Aid, and then you have Gospel Topics. And then where you find, this is the title of the essay in English, and this is the title of the essay in Italian. But here is the brief summary. So they arrive in down in Cedar City, which is south of Utah, and a state president there decides that perhaps a militia should go and attack these people. The things have gotten so rotten between that party and the local saints that by the time they're there, they feel like they have to take action and do something. And they have a council where this was decided, and somebody in the council did not agree with the decision, and so they say, well, let's send a messenger up to Brigham Young in Salt Lake City and find out what he wants us to do. Now, at that time, there was no cell phones or phone or telegraph. The way that news travel was through Pony Express. Okay, so it would take a 2 days ride up to Salt Lake City from Cedar City to give news to Brigham Young. Why I'm saying this? Because one of the attacks that we receive as a church is not just that there was this massacre, is that Brigham Young, the prophet, actually authorized it. Instead, there were documents that showed that there was a council where this was decided, where it was decided to send a militia, but that Brigham Young didn't know anything, and they sent news to Brigham Young to know how they wanted to act. And Brigham Young said, leave them alone, by the time he got back. But by the time the messenger came back, what happened? It was too late. And so they acted on the first order. Was a group of Latter-day Saints with the help of the Paiutes, which was a group of Native Americans that lived there, and also some natives that have followed that group along the, you were moving, and the Indians would kind of follow you along, on the side, kind of check on you and see what's going on and do some stuff with you or against you. And eventually, when the attack by the Mormon militia was made, by this group of people was made, the Fancher Baker group put all, as you see in the Western movies, they put all the wagons in a circle, to protect themselves and make some sort of fort, and they were shooting back to the Mormons hiding in the hills, and the Mormons were shooting back to them, and the Paiutes were helping the Mormons against this group. And then eventually they tricked them. The Mormons tricked this group. Not the Mormons, the Mormons that were there, okay? And they tricks them, and they say, you know, if you leave that camp that you made, we won't do anything to you, you know, basically white flag and truce, you know, let's talk about it. And so they really didn't have a lot of choice. They couldn't stay there forever. They left, and as they left and they escorted them, they turned toward them and execute them. And so both Mormons that were there and Paiutes killed 120 men and women that were disarmed, they had no weapons, and killed them right there, cold blood. The only one that were not killed were 17 or 18 children, age 8 or younger. They probably were too young to remember what happened. And then eventually these children were immediately given to local families to raise as their own. This time what happened, the messenger from Brigham Young arrived and said, don't do anything, just let them through. And so, the prophet had told us to do exactly the opposite of what we did. And so what happened? What does a child do when they do something wrong that mom and dad don't want them to do? They're trying to hide it, trying to hide the evidence and the proof. And so that was something that happened at that time by the people that were involved, was to not reveal what happened. And many of the documents at that time were also eventually destroyed. I think there was a number of, there was some secrecy, there was sworn by the individual that were involved. And so there was both an investigation done by the church and then eventually by the U.S. government about what happened, because eventually, you know, people want to know what happened to this. You know, we're expecting them to come, and the relatives back in Arkansas, they want to know what happened. With regards of my involvement, there was a question. So what happened is that after almost 2 years that this whole thing happened, they realized, you know, what happened, and they tried to identify the children that survived the massacre to return them to their relatives in Arkansas. And records goes that they found all 17 children, but one was missing. They didn't know. And eventually, with the years went by, they identified this 18th child as a girl named Priscilla. And Priscilla was born in 1855, and there is no birth record for her. And she would have been 2 years old at the time of the massacre. And the rumor was that Bishop Philip Klingensmith, which was a local bishop involved with the massacre, he was there, took this girl in, raised her as her own, and did not reveal or did not return it, so making something really bad into something a little bit worse, you know. So this is where I come in. A number of years ago, descendants of this girl, of Priscilla, approached me and asked, is there a way that we can use DNA to establish the biological paternity of this girl? Is she the daughter of the family that raised her, or is she the daughter of the people that were massacred? And so what I did at that time was to reconstruct a little bit of her genealogy. So this is Priscilla, born in 1855. And then this is the individual that I was able to find as a direct descendant of her and test. And then to be sure that I was not missing something out, I looked for some relatives that were also related to her, but we had certainty they were not involved with the massacre, meaning their relationship is out of question with that family. So Priscilla's mom and dad had another girl that was born in 1859, so 2 years after the massacre. So no reason to believe that was another child that was adopted or hidden, that we didn't know anything about it. And so we find that I discovered a descendant for them, and then eventually, as the mother Betsy had a sister who had also descendants, and we asked for a DNA sample to her as well. So we have 3 individuals, 1 to establish a biological relationship, and 2 that we knew their genealogy. And these are mother to daughter relationships. Okay, so Priscilla had a daughter who had a daughter, and her sister had a daughter who had a daughter who had a daughter. Okay, so these are all female relationship, mother to daughter relationship. Why I did that is because there is a piece of DNA that is inherited exclusively on the maternal side. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so here, you see that? No. Anyway, this is, in red you have the mitochondrial DNA. That's the type of DNA that we're dealing with. It's called mitochondrial DNA, or DNA mitochondriale in Italian. That is inherited exclusively on the maternal side. So my hypothesis that I want to test if these 3 lines, these 3 women will share a common maternal line. If they are biologically related, they would also share a common genetic profile on this mitochondrial DNA. And so this is what I did. I sequenced the DNA of these individuals, and you didn't need at this time to test anybody that was dead, because the individuals that we are trying to study would have passed the exact piece of DNA down generation after generation. So to have them would have also, to have their DNA would have also be having their DNA of their ancestor, okay? And so I compared the DNA of these 3 individuals, and they were identical. Then I compared this DNA with some large databases that are available, including a forensic database that has a lot of mitochondrial DNA profiles in it, and discovered that this is not only that they have the same profile, but there is also a very rare profile in the general population. So the fact that they have it similar to each other is not due to chance, but you know, they are indeed related with each other. So that confirmed that Priscilla was indeed the daughter of Bishop Klingensmith, and that the children were probably just 17 and now 18, and she was legal at that point. So a small little study. I have a website called josephsmithdna.com, and the full article about this is there. Another study that I was involved with has to do with why, with some of the escalation that took place as the party was traveling down, why they became more and more adamant and mean with each other. And so there is a report by John D. Lee, and we have right here in this room, walking around with some cards, a live descendant of John D. Lee. In fact, what is your middle name, Doug? Lee. I wouldn't go around and say that, but no. that's not true, absolutely. I wish I had that middle name. It would make me more cool. And I stop it right there. Okay. And so John D. Lee was one of the main characters involved with the massacre. They carried on the first instruction to go there and check on this party and eventually stop them. And he reported in 1858 that this party, as they arrived through Fillmore, and I'm going to show you where Fillmore is. So this is Utah today, you know, this nice shape right here, and we got Salt Lake City up here. So the party would have come down and then start going down pretty much this way. And so here is Salt Lake City, no food, no supplies, and they start going down. And here there is a city called Fillmore. See that? And then as you go more south, you reach Cedar City. That's where the council took place, and the state president say, go after this party. And around this area right here is where Mountain Meadows is, and the massacre took place. And then eventually the people were going down this way into California. And right here in Fillmore is where John D. Lee said that the Arkansas party, so these bad guys coming, they put poison in an open spring, which caused some of the animals and even some people that drank from that spring to die. So they were justified in going after them. Okay? And so how does this theory come up of this poison spring? Well, there are some problems with the theory, but there are also something that we need to consider that they did not know back in 1850. We know that today, but we don't know that at that time. First of all, based on the description, and there were some deaths. So that is true. There were animals that died, and there were people that died in Fillmore. And so that wasn't a lie. But what caused it was probably a misunderstanding. And so if somebody would ingest poison, and the known poison at that time were arsenic and strychnine, did I say it right? Strychnine, thank you. Okay, strychnine in Italian, okay? Strychnine, and the symptoms of ingesting these poisons would be stomach ache, stomach bleeding, vomiting, and convulsions. If you touch poison, usually, unless you put your hands to your mouth, you're okay. Unless you are continually exposed to that, and there is some skin absorption, and there you can have some long-term effect on that. So based on the description how these people die and the way of transmission, it sounds like that could not have been poison, although at that time that was the best explanation they could provide. So this is what from the book Massacre on Mountain Meadows you read. In retrospect, the best guess is that microbes, not poison, caused the reported sickness, a disease borne by cattle and passed to humans. The most plausible explanation for what happened at Combe Creek, which was a spring in Fillmore, was that there was anthrax, which is easily passed from animals to animals, and is also passed from animals to human, but interestingly, is not passed from humans to humans. Okay, anthrax is a bacteria that releases some spores, and these spores has a very poisonous toxin in it that all you need to do is really a small quantity, either inhale or even touch, and then it will get into an open sore or an open cut, and it will get to you and cause, in many cases, would be fatal. So there are some descriptions made about, this description, I'm not going to go in details, I want to wrap these things up, but we have a doctor here, with Brian, and he understands better than all of us that what we know about medicine today is not what people understood back then. The methods of curing disease or the understanding of disease was very much different, and we cannot say whether they were stupid or how could they believe that or how could they have done that, but that was the best they knew at that time, and they believe in it, and it was accepted. It was accepted by the science of that time as this is the best knowledge we have. And so we need to remember not to judge these people from what we know today. But there is a story of a boy, and this boy was from Fillmore. So the story, to make the story short, there were some animals from this party that died around Fillmore. To keep good relationship with the natives that were following along, they donate the dead animals to the Paiutes, to the natives. And natives are known to also eat dead animals. If they will find something that is dead but not dead for too long, and they would eat it, you know. And I bet they had an incredible immune system, because what doesn't kill you, you know, make you stronger. But they would eat. So that it would have been an acceptable gift. So it was going to be a win-win situation. The natives would get some meat, and the party would keep the relationship a little bit okay with the natives by donating something that they didn't need anymore, you know. And what happened that one of the boys, the local boys, Proctor Robinson, went there one day with his knife and a friend, and they say, let's take the, is that the hive? I asked her yesterday. Hide, H-I-D-E, hide, the animal skin, the skin of because whatever value, you know, you could make a nice carpet or sell it, or, and so he went there with a knife and started cutting the skin. And then report says that he scratched his nose because he probably had a sore or a zit. And immediately his face started blowing up. By the time it was evening, his eyes were completely shut. He could not see anything, just a huge face that got inflated. And pretty soon, a few days after this event, the child died. And so and also some of the natives that ate the meat died, and that caused them to be even more mad. You know, what you were hoping caused a peaceful exchange, which instead became, which justify or at least make, you know, cause the Paiutes to follow them down to Cedar City and agree to attack them. And so this was what basically was the reason of thinking that there was some poison in this spring down in Fillmore. So let's talk a little bit about, there is an account why we think this is anthrax and not poison. So this party was coming from Wyoming, and there is an account from a local newspaper. This is the regional newspaper, and that's what it says, is that while they were still in Wyoming, one of the leaders of the Fancher Baker party died. And that caused a delay in their caravan journey. Because this person became really ill, and then after a few days died. And they said that he woke up one morning with a large sore on his hand. And so what they wrote in the newspaper is that he was probably bit by a tarantula while he was asleep. And we know a few things about tarantula. They're not that poisoned, and they don't bite usually. In fact, many kids, I know this might gross you out, but many kids in Utah, Wyoming, Arizona, what do they do with tarantulas? They keep them as a pet. You know, I mean, think about a spider the size of my hand, okay, with large, thick legs, and te ne regalo uno se vuoi. And they keep them as a pet. I don't know if you remember the movie Home Alone, when the kid just put that thing on somebody else's face, you know, Home Alone, okay, and so we know that it could not be possible. But that was what the newspaper reported about the cause of death of the individual. Now I'm going to show you a slide. I hope it won't gross you out, but it's going to be a wound, okay, a little wound. So if you're weak of stomach, you can, you know, Brian, you probably don't want to look at that. I know you cannot stand blood and things like that. But here is 2 wounds. This is caused by a poison spider, and actually in North America, and more in South America, in southern United States, you know, southeast United States, there is a spider called the brown spider, and that is poisonous spider, although it's not lethal, but it causes necrosis of the skin and of the flesh. Basically, you start dying locally, but not whole. You know? And you might need amputation if not treated on time. But this is the wound, I don't know if you can see them, of a brown spider bite. And right here, you can see the difference, is actually what is caused by contact with anthrax. Okay, you see the difference? It's not much. difference. But you know, guess what? That time, anthrax was endemic, meaning it was very common, found everywhere in the Americas. Animals would die of it regularly, but people did not know what caused it. And they didn't know of the existence. Anthrax was not yet identified and categorized as a toxin or a microbe caused by it. And so it would have justified these people to think that the man died of a spider bite, and that the people and the cattle that died in Fillmore could have been poisoned, and that the people that eat or touch that poison also die. That would have been like typical things or normal things to think about it. To make the story short, and actually it's not that exciting of a story, but I was approached by the descendants of Proctor Robinson, which this child had died, to go and dig him out, which we did. And we went to the Fillmore Cemetery. There is a modern gravestone there that was placed more recently there, so we didn't know exactly. We're talking about 1857 Utah. And that records are now well kept as they are today. The records of that, the state of Utah was organized in 1896. That's when you start having, you go to the civil records and you got information. Everything before that can be difficult. So there is a modern tombstone, but we didn't know if that was the right spot. And as we were digging through it, we found another stone buried underground, which was the original tombstone that had the name of Proctor Hancock Robinson on it. And then here is the handsome guy in there. And we found his remains, and took couple molars and some pieces from his femur, which are large bones that could still have DNA in it. And then we collected some dirt samples around the skeleton, because when you would have anthrax, you would have a lot of, what's the word, Brian, excretion? No. Is that right? Like blood that would come out from your nose and your mouth and other parts of your body that we don't need to mention in a chapel. But and so we took the ground samples to see if we could find some anthrax spores. But the first things we did was to take the bones material to Florence. And here's the Duomo that you saw the other day. And next to the Duomo there is a university which deals with ancient DNA, and they did the same maternal DNA, mitochondrial DNA for these bone samples. And this is the boy that died in 1857, which he had two sisters that lived to adulthood. They married, have children, and so we had these 3 living descendants through maternal lines. So we tested these 3 individuals and then the remains to make sure that we had the right guy in the right grave. Run some sequence on the ancient DNA, compare it, the 3 living descendants with Proctor. We were able to get partial profiles which matched. And so we knew, we basically, it's kind of like asking somebody, I want to make sure it's you, show me a document, show me an ID. And so that's what we did with the DNA with this individual. The problem was that as we look for these were the dirt samples, as we look for traces of anthrax, we didn't find any. And not because necessarily there were never any there, but we're talking about 150 years. And so when this kid was buried in a wooden coffin, but by the time we got there, there was nothing left, only bones, which means that everything has been exposed to the surrounding environment, and rain and water and filtration would have caused everything to kind of disappear over time. So we don't know for sure if that has been the cause, but the clinical analysis of the symptom as described by this Wyoming newspaper and the spider bite and the way of transmission of how this child touched his skin and scratched his nose, and the the symptoms that he had, in light of today's knowledge, are a very strong indication that it was indeed anthrax. And so what happened was a big misunderstanding that you know, these people actually willingly wanted to do some hurt and harm the Paiutes and the locals, which they didn't. I mean, there were many other ways, but that was not one of them. And so by the time they went down to St. George and they were killed, the theory of this poison spring was probably one of the motivating factors to justify the attack. And then when Brigham Young said, do not do anything about it, it was too late. There was some cleaning to do. And unfortunately, Doug knows what happened. Then John D. Lee became the scapegoat. Basically, they had to blame someone, and so John D. Lee was executed and was condemned, and there were some people that were proven guilty, and he was the one that was executed to pay for the crimes that were committed. So not a happy moment in Utah history and Mormon history, but a lot of human components that are involved. And again, there are evidence, strong evidence that Brigham Young tried to stop this, did not know anything when the time when this happened. But there is also strong evidence that local leaders made a choice, and that choice was not the correct one. And this is all I have to share with you today.